So are we live now?
I think so. I think we are.
Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Awais Khan. I'm the founding director of the Writing Institute, and I'm the author of In the Company of Strangers and the forthcoming No Honor. So today I have the privilege of having a very distinguished guest, uh, Miss Samira Shackle, who is the author of Karachi Vice. So Samira Shackle is a freelance British journalist writing mainly for The Guardian, with a particular focus on the Indian subcontinent. She travels regularly to Pakistan, where she has family. She spent extensive time there working on Karachi Vice, which is her debut. So Karachi Vice is published by Granta, and it is available all over the world, and especially in Pakistan as well. So welcome, Samira. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute privilege because I really enjoyed your book, Karachi Vice. I thought that it portrayed Karachi so well. Almost felt like I was right there. I mean, I've been to Karachi a lot, so I could totally relate to whatever you'd written. So I really enjoyed it. So thank you so much once again for taking out the time to join us here. And I'm sure that the viewers are also absolutely thrilled to have a person, such a distinguished author in our company today.
Thank you. I'm
So,
so glad you enjoyed it.
So I'm just going to get started with the questions because I'm sure everyone is dying to know more about this book and what inspired it. So Karachi Vice is very hard hitting and at times very moving, a very moving portrait of Karachi and its people. So what was the inspiration behind it?
So the book, actually, I got the idea for the book through two pieces I'd written for The Guardian. One in 2015 and one in 2016. The first one was a profile of a crime reporter, and the second was a profile of an ambulance driver for the ED Foundation. And both of those people ended up being in the book. But it was in the course of reporting those stories. They were both kind of long form stories where I followed them going about their work for a while and spoke to them in detail about their experiences over the previous 10 years or so that they'd been working. It really struck me that they didn't know each other, but they'd experienced some of the same events, like the attack on the airport in 2014, for example, or the operation once it really kicked in from 2015, or prior events such as particular big terror attacks or gang wars and so on. And so although they came from very different socioeconomic backgrounds and areas and professional backgrounds even, there were these kind of points of overlap where they'd both experienced the same thing from different perspectives. And that kind of got me thinking about the way that, I guess any big city, but Karachi it's kind of like multiple cities all next to each other in a way, because it's so big and so varied. Kind of got me thinking about how, despite that huge expanse and variety and difference in all these ways, there were these kind of points of convergence where you have a level of violence or crime or whatever it is that kind of do end up affecting lots of different people, if that makes sense. So that's where I kind of got thinking about it.
Absolutely. No, it absolutely makes sense. And I think that's what lends that credibility to your work, because it is so relatable for anyone in Pakistan or all over the world. I found it very relatable as a Pakistani to read about ordinary people and their struggles and how Karachi as a city has influenced their lives. So I thought that's why I felt it was very moving at times. So you talk about this being a work of narrative nonfiction. A lot of people here have questions about certain confusion about what is narrative nonfiction and what is actual history or actual ordinary nonfiction. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So narrative nonfiction is obviously a nonfiction story, so it's a factual story, but it uses some of the devices of fiction, I guess. So it's very rooted in people's personal experiences. In this case, I did it through spending a lot of time with the people I wrote about and interviewing them really at great length and over a long period of time. And kind of taking those real life experiences and sort of shaping it into a narrative of the kind of story that you might expect to read in a novel, so that there's a kind of sense of character and plot and the things that you might associate with fiction. But I knew that I wanted to do the book like that just because that's my favorite kind of nonfiction to read, actually. Just it's sort of, I find it draws you in, and you're concerned with the sort of personal, emotional stakes for the people you're reading about, and then you end up learning about the context through that. And because I love reading that kind of book, I knew that was the kind of book that I wanted to write. It's definitely quite challenging because to be able to reconstruct other people's experiences, you really do need to spend a lot of time interviewing so that you feel you can do that in a way that's fair. And I always want people to recognize their own experience in it if they've taken the time to share with me. So you don't want to feel you're taking liberties, even though you are writing it descriptively and so on. And with some people that was easier than others. So some people are just such natural storytellers that I could really take so much detail from the interviews and kind of write it up.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand, because that's it totally read like a novel. It had all those elements. It had dialogue, it had character, and it had that thrill to it that you wanted. I literally finished it in a couple of days. I couldn't get enough of it. So yeah, it does read like a thriller. So a large part of it is set in Liari in Karachi, which is called the mother of Karachi. So how easy or difficult was it for you to access this part of Karachi, and what were the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, so when I started spending time in Karachi in like 2011, 2012, it was really difficult to access, especially as an outsider. I didn't have very many connections, and also the gang war was really in full flow at that point. So at that time, it was very difficult. It was an area that I think more seasoned Karachi-based journalists could access because they had the contacts, and you really needed to know the kind of the key players to be able to secure safe access. And it's literally, it's a very kind of, it's a very dense area, like really narrow streets. And it's literally like street by street, block by block, the allegiances change. And it's very complicated terrain in multiple ways. So at that point, it was difficult to access. But by the time I was really working on the book in earnest from, I guess, like 2017, 2018, because the situation in the city at large was so much safer, it was a lot easier to go there. And then because I was focusing on a particular person, Parveen, she was a teacher and is now a sort of activist and campaigner and development worker who's from the area. I was generally with her, and if we wanted to tour around, she kind of knew who to call or what to do to sort of make it safe if we wanted to go to different zones. So it's really about being able to rely on others, I think. But yeah, it definitely has got, as with many of these areas that were the once considered no-go zones, it's generally become a lot easier in the last few years to access and to go in and out, just because the security situation generally is improved.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what we've heard as well, sitting in Lahore, that things in Karachi have definitely improved. And that's apparent from your book as well, because that's what you say towards the end, that things that weren't accessible initially slowly became accessible. And I don't want to give too much away. Sorry, but I'm just going to stop there about the book. So you have to buy the book to read everything. But yeah, I can tell you one thing, guys, that it is a very compelling account of Karachi and its people, and a never before seen look at Karachi. That's what I felt when I read this book. So a little bit, let's just move away from the book a little and talk about you. So how did your journey as a writer start?
That's an interesting question. I think I always wanted to be a writer when I was, depending how far back you want to go, when I was a very small child, I used to like scribble on bits of paper and staple them together and tell my parents I'd written a book. So it's definitely been a long aspiration. And then professionally, I went straight into journalism more or less from university. So while I was at university, I worked on the student paper, and then I came out and I worked at the New Statesman magazine, which is a political and cultural magazine based here in London. I worked there for about 4 years, and then I went freelance in 2012. And at that point, I moved to Pakistan for a year because multiple reasons, really. I wanted to live somewhere that wasn't the UK for a while. It's where my maternal family is from. My mum grew up in Karachi. That's what initially drew me there. And I had a lot of family members there still. So I went there and I was in Karachi for about 6 months and then in Islamabad for about 6 months, covering the election in 2013. And that's where I guess the kind of seeds for the book were planted, because I moved back to London after that, but I kept returning very regularly to Pakistan and specifically to Karachi because I just found myself very, I don't know, it was a complicated place to understand, and I knew I wanted to kind of spend more time getting to know the place and the stories.
Absolutely. You talk about this in your book as well, right at the start. So no spoilers, everyone. It's just that Karachi has a certain gravitational pull to it, that even when you'd left it for London, you still kept returning. There was a certain pull to it, and that's what I feel about Pakistan in general. That you do have that. Whenever I'm in London, I feel like there's a gravitational pull pulling me to Lahore. But so, what was it about Karachi that really pulled you back?
It's interesting. I think it was partly the fact that it was complicated. So even after living there for 6 months, I felt I was just kind of getting a handle on the different things that were going on. So as a journalist, that was very compelling, I guess. And it's a place that's so full of stories and storytellers as well. There's a real kind of there's a lot of people who are just amazing raconteurs and have amazing stories to tell, which I also find very appealing as a writer. And then I guess there was the personal element as well, that it's a part of my heritage I've always felt very connected to, but I've always lived here in London, but I've always been very close to the Pakistani side of my family, and I just felt I had a whole different kind of understanding of where not just my mother had grown up, but where my grandparents had lived and been married and all these different things. I just kind of felt both things, really. You have I think if you're from a mixed heritage background and if you're in any kind of diaspora, you do have this kind of complicated idea of home. And I'm very rooted in London, obviously, but I found something, I kind of really got something from developing more of my own relationship with Pakistan as an adult.
Interesting. That's an excellent response. And so publishing in general is a very elusive concept in Pakistan. A lot of people are still trying to understand what entails this getting published and all of that. So can you tell us a little bit about your journey to publication? I mean, obviously, Karachi Vice was published by Granta, which is one of the biggest publishers in the world. So what was it how did it happen?
Yeah, publishing is, I find, very mysterious in general, actually. And I say that I had been working as a professional journalist for like over a decade at the point when I got the deal, and I'd still found it quite, it can be quite opaque, I think, unpicking how publishing works. So I actually got this book deal in a slightly unusual way, which was so I had the idea for the book, and I'd had the proposal sort of sitting there half done for 6 months or a year, and I just wasn't finishing it because it's quite a lot of work to put together a proposal for a nonfiction book. You have to do sample chapters and a summary of how the whole structure will work, and that's obviously without having done all the research. It's quite a big document. And I was just finding, I don't know, it's something about having worked as a journalist for so long, I find it really hard to do things without a deadline. So I was struggling to finish it. And then I saw there was a competition by Portobello Books, which was Granta's nonfiction arm, although it's now all been folded in just to Granta. And they were holding a competition for unpublished nonfiction proposals. So I thought I'll enter that because it'll give me a deadline. And then I won it, which I really wasn't expecting. So then I got an agent through that and a guarantee of a deal with Granta. So it was a bit unusual, but it did then revert to, I guess, a bit more how it would typically work, which was that, I guess, normally you would approach an agent with your proposal for a nonfiction book. They would maybe work with you on the proposal and how to make it more commercially appealing or whatever, give you advice on it to improve it, which my agent did. And then they would take it to a publisher. In normal circumstances, I guess it would go to multiple publishers. In this case, it was I already knew it was going to be published with Granta, so it only went to them, and then the publisher offers or not, and they kind of negotiate on the book advance.
On the terms.
So, yeah, exactly. So yeah, that's kind of how it works.
Well, interesting. That's the stuff of dreams, isn't it? Winning something and then working on it. That's what we all dream for. But yeah, but one thing that I've noticed in all of no matter who I interview about publishing, is that it's a tough process no matter what. Like even in
Yeah.
your case, like you said, it's so difficult to put together a proposal. And yeah, deadlines. I work well with deadlines as well. I got my edits for No Honor, and my publisher was like, you need to do this. I was like, please give me a deadline, because otherwise I can't.
It's
If you
so
give me a
hard.
deadline, then I'll work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's very important. I feel that as well. So, well, told us a little bit about how Karachi Vice happened and all of that. But how long did it actually take you to write this book?
So I had, guess it depends where you start, because I had this time sort of half working on the proposal and not quite finishing it and thinking through what was going to be in it, which I guess was easily 6 months or a year, but a lot of leaving it to one side in that time. But after I actually signed the contract, it was I had 15 months in the contract between signing it and delivering the book, and I met the deadline. So yeah, 15 months was the kind of time period to file the first draft. So I'd already done some of the research. As I said, it was based on, it sort of drawn out of these original two pieces I'd done. I went back to those people and interviewed them more for the book, and I interviewed, obviously had to do work with the other three, and I kind of drew on, generally I'd been reporting in Karachi for several years at that point, so I was able to draw on that. So that was the first draft. I'd made several trips, and then had the kind of dedicated writing time at the end. And then I sent the first draft in end of November 2019. And then over the last year, there was just kind of dribs and drabs of work. So like, I'm sure you've had the same thing, like edits here and there, or copy editing and text. And so it wasn't like a consistent year of work last year, but it was kind of different stages coming in. And again, that's another thing with publishing. As a journalist, I'm so used to, something comes out within a month or two, most of you writing it. Whereas with this, I was like, what could possibly be happening for a year between finishing the first draft and publication? But there is stuff, it's like all the fine tuning and checking and writing timelines and having maps designed, and then the typesetting and all of that. So yeah, it all takes time.
And then again, the PR and everything, that's something else entirely, because that's what I realized later on, that it's half of it is writing the book and then half of it is promoting it as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really hard. But yeah, I mean, I back when I was a child, I just or a teenager or a young adult, I read books just for the sake of reading books. I never even considered what went on behind the scenes. But now as an author, I do realize that there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. So yeah, so that's really interesting. So my next question is a very interesting one, which I want to ask: that what is next for Samira Shackle?
Well, at the moment I am working on kind of journalistic pieces mostly. It's been a bit of a weird year, obviously, for everybody with the pandemic. Usually I travel at least a few times a year for work. I generally come to Pakistan at least once or twice a year, which I obviously haven't been able to do. I was just remembering that exactly this time last year, in the first 2 weeks of March, I was in Karachi and Islamabad. And then I haven't done any work-related travel since then. So I've been doing some more UK-focused work, currently working on a story about sort of COVID conspiracy theories, which is interesting and quite different. And I don't have plans for a second book yet. I'd really like to write one, but I think it's going to take a bit of time to think of what it is. I'm having now written a book, I'm amazed even more at the people who kind of put one out every couple of years. I don't know how people have the mental energy to do so. Yeah.
And it's so difficult to write a work of nonfiction, to be honest. I think, yeah, I mean, the people who are doing it like every couple of years, I don't know how to do that.
Wow.
Even with fiction, it's so hard. and with
Definitely.
nonfiction, I'm sure it's even much more difficult.
Yeah.
But yeah, I really enjoyed all your insights into how this book happened and what went on behind the scenes a little, and also about your association with Karachi, which is so very important, because it's so very important to get the nuances right, and that's what you did. It's like, even if it's a Pakistani reading it or someone from abroad who's reading it, I think the experience would be very much similar, because you describe it so well. It's so hard, it's so difficult for a writer to get the nuance correct of a particular culture, no matter if they even belong to that culture. So I
Mhm.
think you've done it perfectly, which is a huge credit to you as an author.
Thank you. I
So yeah.
appreciate that. It's definitely something I thought about a lot. Was about the nuances, and I think particularly because I think, understandably, readers, I guess anywhere, but particularly somewhere like Pakistan, where I think a lot of people feel they get a lot of unfair or bad press internationally. I know people can be very
Yeah,
sensitive to certain portrayals, so I wanted it to be accurate, and I wanted it to be fair. And although obviously the book does feature violence and all the things that I guess Karachi has been kind of notorious for in recent decades, I think it also, I hope anyway, includes other things as well. It's kind of about people being able to sort of continue their ordinary lives, and sometimes with quite extraordinary acts of bravery, and amongst that, and the way that people, I don't know, kind of hope and so on continue even through challenging times.
that's what I took from your book, that at the end of the day it offers hope, which is what life is all about. So yeah, I really liked that. So it I mean, for people, those people who haven't read it, it explores different lives of different people. But yeah, so you definitely have to purchase a copy of this book. It's available at Liberty Books and all over Pakistan and
Mm.
all over the world. And now we have some time for questions from the viewers. So if the viewers have any questions, now's the time to put them across to me, and I'll ask Samira those questions. So this is a terrific opportunity. You can ask anything about the book, about her experience as a writer, for any advice that you might want as aspiring writer, anything at all. So feel free to do that. So I'm not going to be seeing your questions directly because we're in a studio. So yeah, so I just got sent one, which is guidance for those who want to be a writer. So this is from Mavish Ali.
So I think that the first advice, it's probably quite obvious, is just to actually write. I would think there's a lot of people who kind of want to be a writer but are daunted about actually writing. So the best thing you can do in terms of honing craft, I think, is just writing as much as you can. And I'm not sure if you're interested in kind of journalism or books, but with journalism, the thing to do, I think, is just trying to get your name out there a bit and building up credited work in different places so that you have a kind of portfolio to show and work from. And with books, if you want to write nonfiction books, I guess my advice is to just really take your time to think about what the subject matter would be, and to really make it something you know, and that you know something about and that you really care about, because you ultimately have to spend so much time with the material and the idea. And I guess just doing a lot of research is really key. I think that the writing is one part of it, but you can, with nonfiction anyway, you can only really do effective writing if you've really done the research beforehand. Yeah, but yeah, just writing as much as you can, I think, is my main advice.
Absolutely, writing, and I'd say reading as well. And you're right, when you're writing nonfiction, it's so very important to do your research, because with nonfiction, you have that added condition that whatever you're writing has to be, to some extent, has to rely on facts. So that's very important when it comes to
Mhm.
nonfiction. So yeah, so we have another one. Do you think fiction around the pandemic will become the norm, or is this trend timely?
I wonder, actually. I guess that, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm maybe a bit sick of reading about the pandemic from the news, definitely. But I'm sure
Yeah.
there'll be some really interesting fictional treatments of it. I wonder if you've got thoughts on that, Awais, as a fiction writer. Yeah.
I actually echo your thoughts because it's so difficult. It's because I've actually gotten sick of reading about the pandemic as well. But strangely
Mm.
enough, I haven't seen any such trend in fiction writing
Mm.
around the pandemic. I mean, yes, there have been collections published, short story and stuff, but no, I don't see a major trend as such yet.
Yeah, maybe because it takes a long time to write a novel and have it, well, as
Yeah,
we've just been discussing, the whole process is quite slow for publishing books, so maybe it'll be a while. But yeah, I guess it's probably, while you're in the thick of a crisis, I think it's probably quite hard to be creative about it or to find
yeah.
something new to say. Maybe later it will come.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are also worried about the fact that by the time they do finish a novel on the pandemic, everything will obviously be over. So it might not
Yeah.
be, wise at all. So maybe that. But I think fiction to some extent is escapism. So people like to read to escape what's going on
Mm.
around them. So if you're just gonna put them in another pandemic box, then that's I don't know if that's suitable.
Yeah, and I think broadly books, both across fiction and non-fiction, can't be quite as responsive as like journalism can, just because the gestation period is so long between
Yeah,
writing something that's a full-length book and then the whole process of publication. It's probably not that obviously there are some kind of quick turnaround books, but I feel like for a full trend, it takes a bit longer.
absolutely. So we can take one final question. And then, so this one is from Mudassar. He says, most of Samira's time is spent in London, many miles away from Karachi. How can this book be a true representation of a socio-political milieu of Karachi?
Sure. So I do live in London, but I've spent a lot of time in Karachi. So I've been working there for the last 10 years, making several trips a year. And for the book, I spent like literally weeks and weeks interviewing people. So with each of the book features 5 people. And I spent like weeks and weeks with each of those people, kind of coming back to them over the course of a year or two for some of them, up to 5 years for some of them. So I really I got to know the people very well. And in addition to that, because I spend make as I say a few trips a year to Karachi and have been doing since 2011. So 10 years ago, I think I've got to know the place. It's probably the place I know best other than London, where I live. I have family there, many family members there. And more than that, I think when you travel as a journalist and you spend time somewhere, you do experience a place differently because you're not just there and seeing people you already know. You're kind of deliberately seeking out places and experiences and people that you don't know and that you don't know about, and spending hours and days talking to people to find out what their experience is. So the book, I guess, is not so much about my perceptions. What I've really tried to do, because it's telling the story through a close focus on these 5 people, I've really tried to sort of recreate their experiences and their perspectives. So it's kind of not really a book about me. It's a book about those people and the things that they've told me. So yeah, that's my answer to
Absolutely.
that.
No, I think that's a brilliant answer. And also, I think to some extent, it's very important for everyone to buy this book and just to see what I mean. Because I am a Pakistani, I've lived all my life in Pakistan. I can totally say that Samira has done full justice to the city of Karachi and its people in this book. I think it's a very accurate portrayal of everything. I mean, I'm no one to say, but just my bit of this is just my 2 cents. But yeah, I mean, you just definitely have to read this book to appreciate the amount of research, the amount of work that has gone into it. And as a writer myself, I can totally tell you that it's not easy. So yeah, but
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm thank you so much for taking out the time. I think we were given 30 minutes, so we're well past that. But yeah, thank you so much for taking out the time, Samira, to talk to me today about your a wonderful book, Karachi Vice, which is now available in Pakistan in all major bookstores, including Liberty Books. Yes, this is the book, guys. Do grab it. This is what it looks like. So this is the edition we have in Pakistan as well. So
Yeah.
and yeah, it's definitely deserves something that deserves to be read. It's and what makes me so happy is that it's also available internationally, so that people abroad can also get to know what ordinary people in Pakistan are going through. So thank you so much once again, Samira, for taking out the time for this.
Thank you so much for having me and for your questions. And thanks everyone who asked questions as well. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, guys. Bye.